thousands of teachers are outside. Is that swaying you in any way?
Look, I think the teacher union leaders knew that they could have been negotiating with the government. We were last night instead of escalating today, and that's a decision they made. I think it's unfair for 2 million kids that ought to be in class today, and our focus is going to be to keep kids in class by negotiating a deal. I'd rather be negotiating with our teacher federations today. But they've
So is that a no? You're not being swayed by this mass protest?
Well, I think, I'm very much persuaded by the voices of families and educators as well, and kids, and they tell me that they want to be in class, and I think that they are the casualty of this. And I think if the teacher unions knew that there's a pathway to continue negotiating, they should take it. And right now we were negotiating as of last night with 2 of our teachers federations, and by the admission of one teacher union president, it was constructive.
Yes.
And so
but polls are showing that families are pretty much more on the side of teachers in this battle than the government.
Look, I mean, there are various data points out there. The number one that I listen to, my North Star, is the voice of students who tell me that they want the system to be improved for them and their parents. And the bottom line is, when we see 60% more spending in education since 2003-04, and yet we see more than half of our kids not passing their grade 6 math course, the math standard, my point to you is, yes, we're going to continue to invest more, but we're going to expect more from the system. And parents want the government to stand strong, to expect greater accountability, greater return on their investment. Parents give so much of themselves to the government, and when it comes to tax dollars, when it comes to their income. And I believe it's high time that we get a better return, that we start to see students perform better, higher graduation rates, higher success in math and STEM education. That's our focus.
But many would argue increasing class sizes is not going to accomplish that.
Well, we're protecting the lowest classroom sizes in the nation under this progressive conservative government for the earliest years, and I'm open to innovative ways to keep classroom sizes down. However,
what does that mean? You have repeated that, I think since September, you have said that. If you're willing to budge on class sizes, why don't you go to the table with a proposal and kickstart the negotiations? Because you haven't sat down with OSSTF since mid-December.
Well, we were negotiating with 2 of the federations as of last evening, and they opted to pause that, to go protest today, and then potentially continue negotiating into the weekend or on Monday. That's their choice. We were ready to go. I want to continue negotiating. But when in the context of classroom sizes, I believe in a world of choices. I believe more money should be flowing in classrooms for the priorities of parents, be it for more STEM education or mental health or special education for kids with exceptionalities. I'd rather see classroom sizes come down than increase in wages and benefits, which would cost the sector $1.5 billion if all unions were to get that increase, which they would. And that's a cost that I think is unacceptable and inconsistent with the priorities of parents who are saying, look, put more money where it matters. Put it in my classroom. And I think that's a position of principle that parents want us to advance in the negotiation.
But then why not say, okay, guys, I'm willing to bend on class sizes. What are you going to bend at? Let's sit down and talk. Get them back to the table.
And we gave the commitment in full day kindergarten when I did that.
No, but you didn't answer my question. No. Why not do that with OSSTF, OECTA?
And I so absolutely will. I'm just simply saying, when we gave a commitment in writing on one of their big asks, just use it as a case study. We gave it to them in writing on the Friday. They decided to conclude the negotiation and add a second day of protest that week. So sometimes there's just inconsistencies.
Because of hiring practices, though.
Yes, because they want to preserve 100% of hiring based on seniority of their union, not on merit and qualifications. They have to defend that to the parents, that they would rather their union, the interests of their union seniority, triumph over qualifications. But the point is, I'm prepared to have those discussions. But Cynthia, we could be discussing this right now. And they opted to go and put 2 million children and their parents and upend their lives. That's their choice. But I hope if they're listening, they'll work with us, knowing that they have a willing partner in the government to get a deal, end this instability, bring some finality to a process that has been going on for far too long this year, and to be fair, over many years in this province where we've seen various forms of escalation that hurt our kids.
Nothing this big in 23 years. You and the Premier have repeated many times that you're putting $1.2 billion more into education, yet in fact much of that money is spent on childcare programs and a childcare tax credit. So how much of that aren't you playing loose with the facts here? Yeah. Because it's not $1.2 billion that's going into the classroom.
Well, I'm responsible for children from birth when it comes to childcare all the way to grade 12, and I'm proud of that.
And so childcare isn't education, and you keep saying we're putting more money into education.
Well, investing in the early years of learning and nurturing that capacity, that talent in the early years, actually I would argue is very fundamental to the success of our kids over the course of their life. But to your point, when it comes to education, what are we giving school boards? $24 billion. That is more this year than it was last year. That's more last year than it was under the Liberals. We're putting more where it matters.
But increased enrollment and inflation
Right, but the point is, when I hear anyone assert anything but a net increase in expenditure in public education, when we have a $200 million math strategy, when we have the most investment ever in the history of Ontario since 1867 in special ed, in math education, in First Nations, and transportation, and French language education, my point is, that talking point, that bumper sticker could be furthest from the truth. We are putting more money in public education, but unlike the former Liberal government, respectfully, 60% increase in spending since 2003-4 in education. That's a lot. But are we seeing the return on that investment? When more than half of kids are not passing their math standards, are you, I mean, not you, but would others suggest that we're getting a good return on that investment? And I would argue, as a progressive conservative, as a generational public servant, we should expect better for our kids. And I think parents want to see that tax dollar optimized. They give so much of themselves and their tax dollars to the system. And I think it's high time we start to get accountability and a greater return on the investment for people in this province so kids could do better. Because if the choice is higher compensation or more investments in students, building more schools, smaller classroom sizes, more spec ed, I choose the latter each and every day. And I know that the unions will like all the above, but we have to invest where it matters for our kids, and that is investing in their success.
So of the $1.2 billion that the Premier stood in the legislature this week and said $1.2 billion more for education, right, how much of that is actually in a classroom from kindergarten to grade 12? Well,
look, 80%, 80 cents of the dollars, every dollar we put in the system is going towards compensation. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I think it's quite clear that we could improve the amount of money flowing in schools of that $1.2 billion and the broader contributions we're making, even in school boards. We want to see
teachers are in the classroom. I'm going to interrupt because you're not answering the question. Of that $1.2 billion that you have consistently said you've increased education spending by, how much is in the classroom?
But my answer to you is, of the monies we're putting, of that $1.2 billion, we're seeing 80 cents to the dollar in education go towards compensation. And so whatever the residual amount is, that should be increased so that we're improving student success. When we see a net increase of expenditure in education, but not an increase in outcomes, I'd argue that the numbers we're putting in have to have greater accountability and a greater return for kids. I want to see more students pass their math standards, for example. So we're going to continue to invest in the forthcoming budget. I'm committing to see more money in public education. We will see that contribution, but I also expect greater accountability. And I think it's high time that we expect more for our kids and we get a better return on investment for the taxpayer.
Last question on this topic. This has to be a tough job to know that there are 30,000 people out there mad at you and angry at this government. How do you balance all of that?
Look, you know, this is not about me. I appreciate that I am the political actor in this position, and I'm honored to be the Minister of Education, trying to unleash the potential of young people in the province and give them hope and opportunity. But at the end of the day, it isn't about me. You know, with respect, there are millions of parents out there who had their life upended because the teacher unions opted to escalate instead of negotiating. And I feel for them. And I just want people to know that I'm going to stand strong on the principles that I think matter to parents: merit-based hiring, investments in schools, not compensation, wages. You know, the teacher unions are asking for, in some respects, 7% wage increases. For OSSTF, that would cost, for their ask, over $600 million. I mean, let's talk about the full picture of their asks. And I think that they're pretty significant. And we offer our educators a generous package because we want to incentivize them, that we want to incentivize the best teachers to stay. But I'd rather see investments flow where it matters. And in this negotiation, we're standing strong on that principle, but keeping focus on getting an end to this, because parents, I think, are fed up, and I appreciate that, and their children deserve to be in class.
When are you going to consider back to work legislation?
Look, we're going to listen to the families, the students, even the educators who have told us that they'd rather be in class. At this point, we still think there's a pathway for a negotiated deal, and that's why we're redoubling our effort to do that. It's why I'd rather be negotiating today rather than perhaps, you know, the teacher unions escalating today. I'd rather see us have meaningful, productive dialogues, as we have as of last night, carry that forward, build momentum, get a deal, and end this impasse that our kids are in the midst of.